Moral principles have a unique authority over other considerations. If there is an option to either choose financial or personal reason, but not both, when choosing a career, either option is open for the individual. But when moral norms are involved, they have to take precedence over non-moral norms. We can see this clearly when the norms have to do with what is morally required, which has two types. Norms with regards moral prohibitions, what we ought not do, and norms with regards moral obligations, what we ought to do. Whenever these moral norms are in conflict with non-moral norms, we ought to prioritize the morally required. We can see the overridingness of morality once we survey the nature of non-moral norms and instances where they may be in conflict with moral ones. Consider social norms, most common of which are known as etiquettes. These are norms that vary from culture to culture. In the Inuit culture, there is a social norm known as wife sharing, where a man may take the wife of another man to a hunting trip if his wife gets sick or pregnant. This is an arrangement that is agreed upon by both husbands and both wives. In this arrangement, it is understood that there is sexual relations in accord with the sexual practices of Inuit culture. Consider an Inuit man who finds this social norm immoral, since he subscribes to the moral norm of marital fidelity. Since staying faithful to your wife is the right thing to do, the moral norm in this case should override the social norm. Now consider legal norms. These refer to the laws of a certain society whose authority is rooted in the state. In many Western societies, abortion is legal. Now imagine a government-funded agency that provides assistance to women who want to have an abortion. Now suppose there is a doctor who finds abortion to be morally reprehensible, given that it is an act that kills an innocent human being. Suppose there is a law that makes it illegal for a doctor in a state-sponsored hospital to refuse performing an abortion. So there is a conflict between the moral norm against killing an innocent human being and the legal norm of performing one's professional duty within a state-sanctioned institution. Since killing an innocent human being is a morally prohibited thing to do, the moral norm in this case should override the legal norm. Now on to intellectual norms, which refer to norms that have to do with expanding our knowledge of the world and of ourselves. These are the norms that drive research, since research is geared towards increasing our knowledge and understanding. However, there are cases in which certain researches violate moral norms. Consider the scientists funded by Hitler's regime. The research experiments are motivated by intellectual norms to understand and solve human problems, but since the experiments involve violating the autonomy, dignity, and rights of certain individuals, they still have committed grave moral wrongs. The intellectual value of understanding the human body should never trump the moral value of respecting human life. The fact that research undertakings today require the permission of ethics committees and explicitly state how they will follow ethical protocols imply that any research by itself is not necessarily a morally permissible undertaking. So clearly, when in conflict, moral norms should override intellectual norms. Finally, there are prudential norms, norms that are mandated by one's self-interest. Prudential norms are ones that have a great force to pull us into action. After all, these are geared towards satisfying our personal needs and desires. Now, this is the kind of non-moral norm which we can expect to be often at odds with what we know to be morally required. In fact, when we think of a moral dilemma, it is often between something that would further our interest versus something that we know we ought to do or not do. Consider, for instance, a dilemma between fulfilling a promise in satisfying one's hunger, such that fulfilling one will compromise the other. In this scenario, the pull towards eating when we are hungry is immediate and attractive. But since breaking a promise is morally prohibited, we should choose to follow the moral norm over what would immediately serve our interest. In conclusion, the force of morality is something we all experience, especially when it comes in conflict with other norms that we also follow. But it is in these kinds of conflicts that we realize that there is something in the nature of morality that puts it above these other norms. Of course, this is not to say that following the moral norm over other non-moral ones is an easy thing to do. In fact, there are various prices to pay when one is committed to the overridingness of morality: one's reputation, one's job, even one's freedom. But in the end, it is in those moments of faithfulness that we find the existential fulfillment of having done the right thing.